Hi guys, I am Vitold and this is Moto Guzzi V85 TT in the Evocative Graphics version. A motorcycle that is fighting with itself and which is full of kind of contradictions. So on one hand it does something well just to ruin it in the second afterwards. It's like brushing your teeth with a great electric toothbrush only to drink Coca-Cola afterwards. It's kind of harming yourself and destroying all the previous efforts. But why did I even want to spend some time with this bike and ride it? And I'll tell you, I have completely no idea, but there might have been two reasons. First, that it's sort of different than most other bikes, and it's a Moto Guzzi with also an original V-twin engine setup, which is the only one mounted transversely. And the second reason is that it looked kind of like a real adventure bike, which automatically triggers my interest. So what was it like? It was strange. The bike is surprisingly compact comparing to anything that has 800 and more in their name. But when I parked it next to a Triumph Tiger 900, it looked like an old grandpa that cannot straighten up his back. Not much muscle as well, and sort of being hidden and not even interested in competing. It is an interesting creature. It's got a drive shaft, for example. Come on, show me another bike in an adventure category that is below 1000 cubic centimeters that has a drive shaft. I don't think there's anything but Moto Guzzi V85 TT. But what for? Well, clearly people at Moto Guzzi want to encourage us to take the V85 TT for long rides, and with the drive shaft that's definitely more comfortable than with the chain, so good for them. And here needs to come a comment, as I was curious how the bike would behave with that setup and the exposed spring on its right side. That definitely looks unusual, but the drivetrain isn't perfect overall. Once you've got the bike in gear and suddenly at throttle, the whole bike gets on its toes and rises significantly. Then you close the throttle and the bike drops down. The drive shaft is cool as an idea, but if it's like in BMW, so you don't feel its side effects on the bike. But here you do feel that the drive shaft is there and that it tries to flex everything that it's connected to. And I wonder how much power is lost on that elevation, lifting over 200 or even 300 kilograms with a rider is no small task. So I guess that the 853 cubic centimeter two-cylinder engine has a significantly harder job to do because of the drive shaft. And would I prefer not to have it in those circumstances? That's a good question, but the answer is simple no. I still like it that it's here. Now, as for power, it is a funny thing as different official and unofficial sources state different numbers. There's 76, there's 79, and there's 80 horsepower. And I believe that it used to be 80 horsepower, and now around 2022 and the later, Moto Guzzi decided that the more important information to promote in the marketing materials and on the website is that it's got Euro 5 compliance now. With torque, it is a bit harder, since the same official numbers both in one place can claim that it's 85 or 82 Newton meters at the same time, so it's basically impossible to tell which version is right. Still, let's say that it's around 80 Newton meters, which is also not a lot, so don't have high expectations when it comes to performance. Riding this particular motorcycle, it's really not that powerful, even though it shakes and it vibrates, thinking probably that it's a BMW GS with a huge boxer engine. There's not much to say about performance, so I'll just say two things. First of all, it's accelerating and it can be quicker than most cars, at least at lower speeds. At higher speeds, it's not really willing to go that much. Reaching 140, 150 kilometers per hour takes time. That's one thing. The second thing is a very strong statement in my case, and I like riding aggressively, and I find it fun and I find it enjoyable. But here I ended up being actually the happiest just keeping the bike in a random gear and cruising at 80 kilometers per hour. And I don't remember any situation with any motorcycle in which I would quickly get discouraged to ride fast and accelerate quickly. And now I'll tell you why. But before I do, this effect doesn't have to be bad. But it's different than on many other motorcycles in the category, and I would actually lean towards saying that certain shortcomings are or can be a direct cause of that. First of all, there's not much power and torque, so you don't get the X factor. Then there is this very specific behavior of the ride-by-wire throttle, which I found super annoying, and in the end, a pretty serious to me flaw. In the beginning of my time with the bike, I was so excited for a few hundred meters because of this Moto Guzzi's agility, its eagerness to turn and to switch directions, that I got immediately too confident overall. But when you feel like at home, you get comfy. And that was my first mistake. My second mistake was thinking that I am on the big GS, as this bike was similarly happy at low speeds. Really cool. It's really well balanced, but this led me to immediately getting in between cars. And once I did that, I eventually closed the throttle, I leaned right, and then we wanted to accelerate and straighten up the bike again, and it just wouldn't react to throttle. And I would get out of balance and I had to save myself, and that was screwed up. So what exactly happened? I opened the throttle just a little bit in that situation. The speed was fairly low, and I just wanted to point the bike straight again. But it turns out that there's a range in throttle movement that is not doing anything to the engine in this initial movement. And this only happens when you've got any gear engaged. If you've got a neutral and just rev it, it's perfect, no problem, no delay, no lag, nothing like that. There's just simply no dead spot. But once you are in the first, or whichever for that matter, gear, the bike is rolling, you close the throttle and want to open it again, and it's dead. And only after you roll the throttle even more, it reacts after that centimeter or so of its movement. It was less, so like a half of a centimeter, but it of course feels like more when you need it and you're just trying to open more throttle without trying to explode to shoot the bike in front of you. That's a problem for me. And I haven't experienced it in literally any other motorcycle so far. So yeah, it's also unique. We've got to give Moto Guzzi that. It's badly unique, unfortunately, and so if you want to make a U-turn and you don't want to use clutch, guys, be really careful. I felt it in the very first turn, and that's why you see me suddenly coming closer to the fence for no real good reason. The second tight maneuver was exactly the same, and at that point I was already using bad language, which thankfully you guys cannot hear from the inside of my helmet, and I'm not sure you can actually get used to that behavior in general. And I don't mean bad words, bad language, I mean this delayed reaction of the throttle. The third thing that would discourage me to push it and just stay at lower speed and just simply cruise was that the foot pegs vibrate like crazy at higher RPM. The handlebar is fine, but once you start feeling like you want some of that speed and bump up the RPM, you just start laughing and you cannot focus. Strange. The bike is tickling your feet almost like an old grandpa playing with a little kid. But if you try to tickle grandpa back and rev it all the way up, first it lights up half of its dash. It's warning you to switch the gear up, and if you don't, it slams you in your butt for going too far, and that's almost literal. Translating it into what happens on the bike, it just cuts power as suddenly as Ducati Multistrada V4. It's just that there I get it, because it's 170 horsepower, so the tempo of accelerating is much higher than here, so the cut of fuel stops all that momentum. But here in this Italian other bike, there isn't that much power, and it feels like it engages brakes almost to slap you in the face for pushing it too much. So there you have it. There are two more things here actually, so don't worry, I'm not done yet. Sometimes the gears simply won't engage. You want to keep accelerating quickly, you want to go fast, but switching from third to fourth, or to from fourth to fifth gear may or may not work. Either you keep going or struggle with the gear lever trying to convince it to engage the next bloody gear. And if you are at high RPM, it's like 50-50. It will do it or it won't. At lower RPM, it's generally fine, but sometimes you may feel that additional resistance in the movement. It depends on nobody probably knows what, but it's there. This is definitely not a good gearbox. If you remember BMW transmissions around 2010, then I guess it's back here now in this Moto Guzzi. I'm of course kidding a little bit, but it behaves very similarly. Sometimes you've got to punch it in the face for it to work and comply. And sometimes the click of the gearbox is so loud that you may wake up your wife in the morning or evening just switching to the first gear. And then there is this unsettling behavior which you experience when realizing that throttle at higher RPM, even without changing gears this time, it makes the handlebar start slapping left and right for a very short, thank God, a moment, for a couple of times, every time you open and close the throttle at high RPM. So you get to high RPM and you quickly close it, also to change a gear or not, because you may just test it opening and closing, and you will see how the handlebar behaves. Or maybe better, actually don't do that. I did that for you guys already, you can see it in the video. That was heavy and well, I was not happy with every single one of those things that I just mentioned. What I was happy with, on the other hand, was the soft and nice seat, which is pretty low because it's at 83 centimeters. The knee angle wasn't bothering me. I think I might want to try a taller seat if it was only about comfort. I'm 183 centimeters tall, 6 feet tall, but first I would have to see if this other than stock seat is also connecting as nicely to the upper part of the fuel tank, because I really liked looking at the bike from the, let's call it 3/4 from the rear, as it would make this nice straight line like in some supermoto motorcycles. It's very nice. But it's ruined when you look at the grandpa from the front and his big, surprised, kind of not understanding eyes and this super long and curved nose like in Baba Yaga. Or maybe we shouldn't even call it a nose, but a beak. There, that thing is huge. It was supposed to be retro, and it looks like Honda Baja, written with J, so Baja. So yeah, really great job, absolutely. And I'm not a fan of the idea, but some design elements are definitely nice. Like the steel frame that in this version is painted in a nice contrasting with the rest red color, and you can see it starting at the front lamp area and going all the way back to the rear rack. And also the engine, visible from the front V shape, is different, and it's actually cool looking. It is something unique. The downside is that once it gets warm, all that heat shoots straight into your legs and your inner thighs. And I guess that if I didn't have huge knee protectors, it wouldn't be that nice. It was getting pretty hot on it, but I can understand that it may be purely because of the design and the position of the cylinders right in front of your legs. The other thing that I like apart from the seat is the suspension. The front fork wasn't diving too much, it was dealing fine with bumps, not the best, but along with the rear suspension in a way that I wasn't actually paying much attention to it. So it's good. It wasn't gliding over bumps like BMW R 1250 GS or even F850 GS or a Harley Pan America Special, but it wasn't also as stiff as Africa Twin 1100. The rear suspension was sort of becoming floaty, and at certain longer tarmac height adjustments, it felt like made of rubber largely, so it wouldn't immediately or it wouldn't quickly absorb the difference in the first part of motion. So it was like on a trampoline. It would react on a similar scale to what would cause its movement in the first place. And I guess that the shock absorber is just not strong enough, and it needs more time to, stabilize it than in other motorcycles. And I didn't really like that, but on a long highway ride, I guess I wouldn't complain about that at all. And overall, it was definitely on the comfortable side, which suited me. In corners, it reminded me of a V-Strom in its first and also the third generation, so the current one in 2022 as well, the 1050, as the V85 would not only resist a little bit only when leaning at higher speeds, so it definitely wasn't fighting, and then it would just stay dead set on the angle, on the course that you chose for it. This is quite confident and encouraging, and I feel that I actually touched the ground with a foot peg in one slow speed situation. It was on Michelin Anaki tires that are basically a 50-50 road and off-road tires. Rim sizes are rather traditional for this class of motorcycles, so it's 110 in width in the front and 19 inches in diameter, and 150 wide in the rear, being 17 inches. The rear brake worked okay, the front one also worked, but with the first setting of the lever, I could squeeze it so much that it would start resting against the grip, and I had to push it away as much as possible with the settings, with the twisty knob, as far as possible, and only then squeezing it with appropriate force that I actually might have needed or I did need, it wouldn't make it touch the grip. That wasn't too reassuring, right? The bike was only around 10,000 kilometers and was an official Moto Guzzi motorcycle from their press park. So yeah, the brakes were not the strongest point of the whole bike. The windscreen was one of a few different variations of this bike, and the one I was riding had the shortest one actually, and of course it was totally useless. You cannot easily adjust it as well because it requires tools, and all you can do is you can basically change its angle. Come on. In the end, with this short windshield at 120 kilometers per hour, you would have to lean forward and start holding the handlebar harder not to fly away. This is a bit of a challenge as the handlebar is pretty significantly bent backwards. So towards you, the rider, it's like this, very close, not very, but it's rather close to you. And this caused a pretty relaxed position and maybe even made me lean backwards just a little bit, but it was enough to make me lazy. It was nicely wide. It was actually nicely wider than in some other regular motorcycles, so I appreciated that. One of very few those adventure enduro touches, as I would be actually worried to take it off-road, especially after touching the ground with the foot peg. And on that same part of the road later on, I wasn't exactly sure when I would crash with one of the pegs into one of the speed bumps that I was riding over, as my feet started feeling very, very low and very, very close to the ground. And I found a number of 20.8 centimeters of ground clearance, which sounds great, but I couldn't actually verify this data anywhere else. Still, the pegs are very, very low, so be careful. It is fun to be able to say that I scratched the asphalt, but I'm not sure that in this case it's such a huge achievement actually. What is an achievement is a 23-liter tank, which is a pretty cool thing for a also rather low-powered motorcycle. And automatically, it makes the range impressive, further proving that someone definitely had long rides in mind designing this motorcycle. Slow rides with not too tight turns as well, likely 230 to 235 kilograms of weight with 90% of fuel in the fuel tank sounds pretty normal, and you're having also cross-spoked wheels on the bike. It definitely doesn't feel heavy. That's great, but remember that the seat is pretty low and the whole bike seems to be rather close to the ground, so this also helps. It's a weird creature, I gotta say. I told you once, I'm gonna say it again, it is kind of full of contradictions. Adventure bike that resembles a scramble style a little bit, perhaps we could define it this way. Now about the display, it was fine when riding and there isn't much going on, so except for checking the speedo, there's no need really to pay too much attention to it. At certain angles it would reflect a bright sky, so that's not the best, but hey, what do we actually need from it during riding? There are 5 riding modes, but I guess most of us would just choose a sport or strada, so street mode, and leave it this way. And I couldn't actually feel any difference between sport and strada, but in sport I managed to spin the rear wheel coming out of the turn and accelerating rapidly at still lower speed. So maybe the difference is in how intrusive the safety systems are. Another case of using the display is when it lights up with the next gear warning you, which you might consider taking seriously so that it doesn't cut the power suddenly and send you through the windscreen. You can also set at which RPM you want that hustle, that light or whatever that is flashing. And the last set of circumstances is when you are planning to ride more aggressively or overtake. You may really want to check the gear that you are in. The engine is really quiet when you're cruising, and there is really no way of telling how much power and torque backup you've got. So know that if you are at low RPM, the power definitely isn't there and the bike is pretty sluggish. Reduce a few gears to stay in the upper range and then start playing. That's gonna be my suggestion. And note that the range is pretty narrow as well. Also, prepare your left foot to use the gear lever as hard as possible in the beginning so that you don't get stuck in one of the gears suddenly. Damn it, that was a pain as well. Yeah, the windscreen doesn't help to judge here, as all you hear is wind, but the gears really matter in this bike. And I won't say it's underpowered, that would be an overstatement, but it requires planning up front. I said it nicely. The front light may be a surprise as Grandpa's eyes light up with fire, as it's an LED lamp. So a touch of modern technology in a retro-looking motorcycle, and I noticed that the car drivers were definitely seeing the high beam pretty well. So big size of the lamp was very helpful here. And again, not my style in terms of visual preference, but on the safety side, they do the job pretty well, those two big front round lamps. And now the rear lamp, man, this is awesome. This is awesome. I loved it. It looks like some jet fighter engines throwing a fire already out of them. With the shaky experience when revving the bike, because it shakes, it kind of waves side to side when being revved like BMW Boxer. The exhaust is also on the other side than you would actually expect it in a motorcycle, in general at least. So in here it's on the left side. If you put the bike on the side stand, the exhaust is on the, let's call it, a more hidden side of the bike, and it's also easier for you to touch it. Finding the reasons for that will be pretty hard now, but it doesn't matter. The drive shaft is on the right side, so maybe it's done to keep the weight balance somehow. I think that might make a lot of sense, but it's still just a guess. What I wish I saw was a single swing arm, like in previous Ducati Multistrada 1260. Unfortunately, on one side there is a normal swing arm, roughly shaped, and on the other one there is drive shaft. So it's not as cool as it could be, I think. Anyway, if it contributes to stability, then I would be ready to sacrifice the design around the rear wheel. If I haven't mentioned it already now, then I really appreciated how well this Moto Guzzi was balanced at low speeds. And also when riding straight. Now this has been a real challenge in this class of motorcycles for some bikes. I had literally no issues at all getting in between the cars and just riding dead straight. So huge respect for that to Moto Guzzi. It's really freaking awesome. It's better than the V-Strom, it's better than Harley Pan America, and it's a ton better than Honda Africa Twin 1100. And I would say that it was as good as Ducati Multistrada V4 and maybe even close to the big GS. I really had no complaints there, and I was impressed. That was really good, if not the whole throttle issue. Riding slowly, no one can actually forget about throttle control, as in the end it was not a good experience because of that, and I'm really sorry about that. Maybe I would be more convinced in general if the bike would have had a keyless ignition. But what I liked very much was a fuel cap with a cover that you actually lift from your side, not from the front. It was really quick and easy to lift it, and it felt weirdly satisfying. Now a quick story from the dealership. Right before me taking the bike from the dealer, there was another rider who I was looking at him through the window, and who was struggling with the same bike, and he was clearly having problems starting the engine. And I thought that he was either very inexperienced or the bike was broken. It's not very hard to start a motorcycle unless it's a Harley or an older Ducati, which may not want to start depending on their mood. So I thought maybe same happens here. But what a surprise to myself when I happened to struggle myself. Here you've got it. And I would switch the bike off with the ignition button. Then I would press the starter, and it just wouldn't react. And I was, standing there not knowing exactly what to do. Dead silent, nothing happens. And I would switch it off completely, then on, press all the buttons, and suddenly it would start again. I couldn't figure this out as well for a moment. So I would struggle again and again, and then I realized that you need to push the ignition button once again after switching the bike off, if you then want to start it on. Only after a day I realized that this button is actually having two positions. So it is an on-off sort of switch in the form of a button. And hear me out so that you don't make a fool of yourself like both of us did, and also I assume plenty of others. So if you switch the bike off using this switch and not the key, which you have to insert into the ignition, it's left in a position that doesn't allow you to start the engine. The button has tiny travel, and you really may not see that it's either in line with the surface, so kind of flat, and then once you press it again, it's sticking out for a millimeter or so. Please be warned, and I recommend that you operate the key instead, so that you don't touch that button, because there isn't any clear sign of in which position it is, and which position means exactly what. I guess pressed further in line with the other stuff is on, and sticking out is off. But yeah, that's very confusing. That can be very confusing, just like also the light switches. On the right handlebar, you switch between a daytime running light, normal light. Then on the left handlebar, you've got one more switch, which is responsible also for the lights and responsible specifically for flashing low beam and high beam. That's a little bit maybe weird, isn't it? The indicator switch was also different. And this one here is made out of a big flat piece of plastic with some tumor on it. That's basically how it looks. So pushing the tumor left and right, it makes it kind of sway left and right for both directions of indicating. That's understandable, that's fine. The thing is that if you switch it to the right, the flat part of it, that's pretty long, is lifting up and it may come against a part of your thumb. And you might feel it every single time, and this is just annoying. Also, like in Harley, they went with a half-touch system when switching it off. So you press it and there's no click. In the beginning, I was still checking the dash, and on a motorcycle, I'd rather not need to do that. Please stay with what works, Moto Guzzi. And this reminded me of one more unusual feature. Its sound, which is uneven and like in an old American V8 engine. It really sounds different, and that could be fun. And it could be fun only with an aftermarket exhaust, because this one isn't doing really much. There wasn't much equipment in the whole bike, but there's ABS, there's cruise control, there are riding modes including off-road ones that influence ABS and traction control. There are also handguards. There is also engine protection cover and those super tiny mirrors, which are a standard for some reason. Try to replace them with something larger, which is either round to match the style or totally square. If we're going retro, let's go retro here, and I think it would work as well. There is also no quick shifter, which with this gearbox could maybe save it a little bit, but it's not here, so obviously it cannot. There can be heated grips. There can be also a center stand, and there can be crash bars, which may help you save the cylinder heads that stick out to the sides if the bike falls. Let's hope it doesn't. I really liked the color scheme of the bike. I loved its balance. It was surprisingly good and was surprisingly encouraging. The drive shaft was a fantastic luxury to have, and the whole bike is, yeah, it is different. There aren't many Moto Guzzis on the street. If we look at the front of the bike, at the not that impressive performance and some weird behaviors and solutions to those previously generated problems, it may kind of also explain why there might not be so many of them. It's an interesting combination of comfort and relaxation with some encouragement, then mixed with a punch to the face if you start annoying the bike too much. If I'm going to rate this bike, I'm going to give it a 6, especially that it did embarrass me twice. First, when I had to support myself not to rip off some car's mirror or not to crash into it, and then when it played the game of its button or a switch. That was freaking weird. But on the first day after giving the bike back, I had a dream about how easy and nice it was to handle. You know, if you have it in gear and you keep the throttle steady, it's going to be a pure pleasure, I'm telling you that. If Moto Guzzi would fix that throttle response, it would definitely give it back a lost point, making it 7 out of 10. And if the design was different and more perhaps up to date, I might actually even give it half point more. Now, if you like the design today, please do count it as 6.5 out of 10. And that's it from me, guys. I hope that you found it informational, and please do let me know what you think about this score of the bike, because there are some, heavy forces weighing in here. Anyway, all the best and see you in the next video.